Welcome to this fourth episode of Short and Nerdy Nonfiction with Conlon Sinclair. I am your host, Conlon Sinclair. I just want to give another quick shout out to my aunt, Molly Murphy. She is a tremendous painter who does landscapes, mostly of rural Arkansas, and her paintings are available in the Lawrence, Kansas City area. I tried to give her a shout out in a previous episode, but the ticking of the clock got in the way. With that out of the way, today's episode is about some of the most ridiculous stories you're going to find in the cryptozoological world. Cryptozoology is, of course, the study of animals that are likely not to exist. Technically, the study of animals that have yet to be described scientifically. I touched a little bit on cryptozoology in the first episode, but those were more plausible, realistic cryptozoological stories, and this episode is about some of the most absurd ones. So first off is the story of Mothman. No, he is not a comic book hero and does not belong in a bad cartoon. Mothman was a giant humanoid bird that appeared in West Virginia in the 60s. The story goes that Mothman attacked several people and was seen flying over the local bridge. The local bridge then collapsed, killing several people in the biggest local disaster that the Point Pleasant area ever experienced. What is interesting is after the bridge collapsed, there were no more Mothman sightings, and people began to believe that Mothman was a harbinger of doom. That he was some sort of spirit that predicted the collapse of the bridge and tried to warn the townspeople. This is a very interesting story as far as mythology goes. It's very interesting. Of course, there have been plenty of people who have searched for a physical Mothman, either a real bird that was misidentified or a mutant bird created by some horrible radioactive mutation in the Air Force or Army base, I can't quite remember, that is around Point Pleasant. Real ridiculous stuff. But what is the background of this idea of the bird that foretells disaster? That is interesting to me. Whether or not a mutant bird at one point was created by the U.S. Army sounds more like what you're going to hear from Eric von Däniken than from me. No offense, Mr. von Däniken. I've read many of your books, but I don't agree with any of them. Anyway, there are several ideas of where the idea of Mothman could have come from mythologically. There are harpies, birds that the Greeks believed were personifications of bad weather. The harpies are sometimes considered the dogs of Zeus. They are the windstorms that destroy things on behalf of the storm god Zeus. They're birds or human bird hybrids of some sort. There aren't a lot of Greeks in Point Pleasant, sadly, so let's put that aside. Banshees are Irish. They are fairy women whose wailing predicts death. Technically, in a traditional Irish funeral, there is a professional mourner who wails ritualistically at the coffin of a dead Irish person. This is a Celtic custom of uncertain origin, and the idea later became that the fairies, who are associated with the Celtic population of Ireland, would wail ritualistically before a death to predict it. Technically, there's nothing you can do once the banshee is mourning you, you are dead. There are certainly a lot of Scots-Irish in Virginia, a lot of Irish immigrants who came to the area too to work in the coal mines. It's entirely possible that that is where the prediction part of the Mothman myth comes from, but banshees aren't birds. The bird part and the prediction part might be separate. There might have really been sightings of a large bird that later got conflated with the banshee myth to create this myth of Mothman. Maybe not. Of course, there is Stolas, the European demon of numerology, or it could be astrology. I am not a practitioner of the occult, so I sometimes get my demons confused. But it's very fascinating. If you Google Stolas, you're mostly going to get the cartoon character from the new Amazon series about demons. But if you look a little bit further, you'll find a depiction that looks a lot like the Duolingo owl, but with giant human legs. It's very kind of unsettling, but that is almost exactly what Mothman looks like. I don't know that much about demonology or the occult. It's not an area I've done a lot of research in. I'm not the kind of religious person who thinks if you research that you're necessarily going to hell. It just never really appealed to me. Could the people of Point Pleasant, West Virginia have been more in tune with those kinds of things? Probably not. It's probably a coincidence, but it's interesting. Besides the mythological origins of Mothman and the idea of a giant bird, it's kind of funny that he's called Mothman. And the statue in Point Pleasant is of a Mothman, when none of the eyewitnesses said anything but giant bird. Several cryptozoologists have made the rather ridiculous claim, in my opinion, that we're dealing with a Pleistocene vulture called the Teratorn. The Teratorn was a bird with like a 25-foot wingspan. It was a vulture that fed on dead mammoths. Obviously, there's not enough food in West Virginia for something that ate dead mammoths during the Ice Age. This goes into lots of stories of giant birds, which are supposedly Teratorns, survived to the modern age. These are usually called the offensive name of Thunderbird, after the Native American legend. I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous, I think. Prehistoric animals surviving into the present day, or at least long past the Ice Age, is entirely plausible in most cases. But when you're dealing with a bird the size of a small airplane that is humanoid enough to be mistaken for a demon, that's not something that's going to stay hidden on the East Coast. It's just not. Let's put this down as absurd. Okay, we've got another great, bizarre cryptological story. Loren Coleman, the famous cryptozoologist, talked in his studies of Bigfoot folklore about what he called a true giant. Much like my claims or my reiterations of other people's claims that elves are Neanderthals, Loren Coleman claimed that giants are Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus was a large ape that lived in China and India before the last Ice Age. We don't know a lot about it. The only fossils that have been found have been teeth and jawbones. So it's really anybody's guess what Gigantopithecus was. We really have no idea. There's not a lot we can extrapolate from. Generally speaking, Gigantopithecus is thought to have been an orangutan that was the size of a bear. Again, there's no real concrete evidence for this. The idea that it's an orangutan relative is plausible. Orangutans are the only ape in Asia currently besides humans. We just don't know. Gigantopithecus could have been a bear-sized orangutan. It could have looked like a gorilla. It could have looked like a chimpanzee for all we know. I mean, there's really no idea. It could have been a type of ape that we have no concept of in the modern age. But Loren Coleman thinks it is a hominid, a relative of man. He thinks it walked upright, and he thinks its descendants are the source of giant legends throughout the world. He claims rather strangely that Gigantopithecus was of human-like intelligence, was able to mimic humans to make clothes and weapons, and lived alongside humans for thousands of years, presumably eating us as food, as giants do in myths. There's a lot to poke holes in there. Of course, we don't really know anything about Gigantopithecus, and the idea that Gigantopithecus could be a 15-foot human being is kind of ridiculous. There's no evidence that such beings ever existed. Stories of giants are certainly worldwide, but also oh, I'm terribly sorry. Got something in my throat there. Just give me 1 second here and I'll continue. Yes, I am terribly sorry about that. Allergies. But other people have said Neanderthals are also the source of giant myths. And Neanderthals probably aren't. They're shorter than humans. They're very human-looking. So that's probably wrong too. Gigantopithecus has long been associated with Sasquatch. The idea that Sasquatch is a North American Gigantopithecus is a very common belief among people who believe in Sasquatch. It's very common for people to refer to Sasquatch as Gigantopithecus americanus. The Yeti is believed to be a Gigantopithecus. There are reports of giant apes in the forests of China. Those are called the Yeren. The Chinese government is very open about the fact that they believe in the Yeren, and that it is an indigenous Chinese animal. That probably is Gigantopithecus, and if the Chinese ever capture one in one of these rural areas of the country where nobody lives, we'll finally have Gigantopithecus in the flesh. These stories of true giants in Malaysia and Europe and whatnot, I'm not buying it. I read all of Loren Coleman's book on the subject. I really don't recommend that you read it too. I think a lot of it is baloney. But if Gigantopithecus is not the source of giant myths, what is the source of giant myths? Another theory on Sasquatch is Homo heidelbergensis. Homo heidelbergensis was nicknamed at one point the Goliath Man. It was supposedly an ancestor of modern man. It is believed by many that Homo heidelbergensis shrank and evolved smaller forms which became the Neanderthal man and us, humanity. But a general idea of Homo heidelbergensis is an animal, a human animal, a human ancestor, I apologize, which is much larger than humans today. We're talking an average of 6 feet, 6'3" in height. A race of people who look like basketball players, basically. That's a plausible idea, maybe, for a giant myth. Homo heidelbergensis was known to have existed in Asia, Europe, Africa. We know genetically that there are so-called ghost hominids that humans interbred with that don't show up in the fossil record but show up in our own genetic codes. Those are thought to have lived in Africa. One of them might be a giant basketball player-sized species that evolved from heidelbergensis and didn't shrink like we did, like the Neanderthals did, to a much greater extent. But again, we're never going to know. One of the reasons that is much more plausible is that Gigantopithecus, despite the fact we know almost nothing about it, is quite ancient. It existed at the same time as very, very primitive humans. If it was a human-like ape, it would have had an intelligence which is much lower than anything we'd see in humans today. A heidelbergensis descendant would have probably have the same kind of intelligence as humans. Neanderthals, too, are now considered to have the same kind of intelligence as humans. At that point, you're actually looking at a world with elves, giants, and men, all who have comparable intelligence because they're all basically subspecies of humanity. We've got a whole idea of Fantasyland right there, Middle Earth right there, perhaps in the geological, archaeological record. Gigantopithecus, probably not. We're never going to know anything about Gigantopithecus. Chinese pharmacists use the bones as miracle cures. So, without any really good luck in either capturing one alive or finding a skeleton on an expedition, the Chinese institutes of whatever the communist Chinese institutes for paleontology are never going to give us anything real concrete. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank everybody who is listening. The next episode is the last one of this season. I only planned 5 episodes this season, but this production has gone very smoothly, and I am certainly planning on another season. When the new season will premiere, I don't know. I might be able to give you better updates next episode. But I will see you all next week. Thank you so much.